Hey everyone, I want to talk about OCD and anxiety based around the holidays. And I'm going to talk about not just the holidays coming up, because many people don't celebrate Christmas, or most people celebrate the New Year's, but any single special event, whether this should be a wedding or a bar mitzvah or an anniversary or something like that, and why holding these really rigid beliefs about how those days should be are what drive the majority of our disconnection and our emotional disturbance based around these events. Now, there is a really, really big problem on social media specifically about needing to feel a certain way on certain days. And I'm going to go into all of that and break all that down and why none of that actually makes a lot of sense. So before I go any further, please subscribe, hit that like button down below, look for the WhatsApp link, direct message Phil. We can get you in right away. We have a lot of slots that have filled up over the last couple months, but we try to get people in, like I say, as best as we can. So the number one day that people hold really rigid beliefs about are weddings. And people say, you need to feel a certain way on your wedding day, which is certainly not true. There's no universal principle that state how you should feel on a wedding day whatsoever. None at all. And that so many people hold that, or you should feel a certain way on a divorce day or the death of a loved one or something like that. But none of that makes any sense once you break it down. There's no universal principles that state you have to feel a certain way, just like there's no universal principles that state you have to believe a certain thing. And this is always a fun topic to talk about when I just walk by a group of people that probably would look at you and hear and think that's completely insane because of the way that the world thinks. Because I just passed a group of people on the right. And it's always fun talking about this because that is, in many people, a shame-attacking exercise, because when you actually break these beliefs down, most people are extremely resilient to thinking that way, especially when there's money involved. So people will say something to me like, but I spent 90,000 pounds or dollars on my wedding. People do that, right? People do stuff like that all the time. Yeah, that doesn't mean anything, though. That doesn't actually mean that the world owes you a good day. No amount of money. There are people who have spent $250,000 on their education. They went to medical school. They became a medical doctor. Then they got killed in a head-on collision 3 days after they graduated school. Stuff like this happens all the time. I just was reading something the other day of a newlywed couple that was just shot and killed by their neighbor. I mean, you just, and the life could end like that. There was a case here up in Denver where a woman was walking her dog, and she got into a disagreement with the person, and the person pulled out a gun and shot her and killed her. There was another one a couple months ago where a guy was drinking and driving, and it was literally their wedding night, and he had hit the wife and killed her on their wedding night, which is a horrible thing. I mean, that is, I cannot imagine being in a situation like that, but that type of stuff does happen all the time. And that's the reality of it. So until we break down the deservingness, because it all comes down to a belief system based around deservingness and universal fairness. But until you become comfortable with not needing anything, remember, acceptance doesn't mean agreement. So until you get much more comfortable with, I don't need a certain day to go a certain way. I don't need my wedding to be the way I want it to. And then plus, if the wedding already happened, then you're ruminating in the past all day, thinking about, I wish the day went like this. And there's a lot of natural humanistic belief systems based around that. But the more you try to lock that down, you're not going to get anywhere with that. So if you had a quote unquote, ruined wedding day, and you're blaming a loved one for saying something, if you're blaming your OCD, well, that's a one-way track to stay stuck. So the world, again, doesn't owe us any favors. I can name numerous examples like the ones I used in the beginning of this video. And that's why the acceptance doesn't mean agreement principle comes in. And these principles destroy many relationships in that sense, because of, I don't feel a certain way around this partner, I don't love them, I don't feel love around them, et cetera, et cetera. So none of that actually has any sort of scientific universal backing behind it. It's just the way humans operate inside their mind because of the connection feeling the brain produces when you hold belief systems. What people don't understand is when you hold a belief such as, okay, I'll give you a really good example. When you hold a belief such as, I should enjoy my wedding, okay? That belief in of itself with avoidance behaviors can create all sorts of physiologic havoc inside your mind. This is something I don't talk about too much because I spend usually time going over the one-to-ones on this, but that can do all sorts of stuff to your serotonin and dopamine. This is why the serotonin dopamine chemical imbalance doesn't mean a whole lot. Are there people that have primary problems coming from serotonin, dopamine, and neurology? Sure, much less common when it comes to chronic anxiety and OCD. The beliefs based off the genetics in the mind, so if you have the belief of, I should enjoy this day, this shouldn't go that way, that will disrupt your chemicals in your mind because you're thinking that way. That's why faulty thinking is one of the largest, if not one of the only reasons for chronic depression. One of the only reasons. And that is something that's very hard for people to wrap their heads around because they don't want to. They want to blame the outside world. And then remember, events play a factor in all of our lives, but they aren't the primary thing. Because there's people out there who have, like, take me for an example with my wedding. I got married at a courthouse, really cheap, which was great. I got married at a courthouse because we were both in school. We had no money. And I didn't have chronic OCD at that time, but it was certainly brewing, is the best way to say it. I developed chronic OCD 6 months after my wedding. But on that wedding day, I remember thinking to myself, because I struggled with ROCD for a while. It just wasn't a primary theme of mine, but I definitely had to break down a lot of beliefs around my relationship. I remember thinking, what am I doing? Me and Eric have talked about this because I vented it and confessed it to her when I was stuck. I was blow drying my hair, and I remember thinking on my wedding day, what the hell am I doing? Like, I don't even love Erica like that. This just makes no sense. And that is one example, and I've never looked back from that. I never have gone, oh my gosh, what does that mean, or anything like that, because I've accepted the reality that Erica is a piece of my life. She's a benefit of my life. The wedding was a day in my life, a singular day. There's truly no difference between a wedding day and the death of a loved one outside of the emotional experience that you have inside your mind. And once you understand that and you get comfortable with wearing those emotions, you realize there's the days of the week don't mean anything anymore. Days of the year don't mean anything. Like, I'm going away to Florida in 2 days to go for Christmas. Haven't thought about it one time. I haven't thought about, oh, Christmas is coming up. It's going to be so much fun. I mean, I have that awareness of that. I'm going to spend time with my family and my wife's side of my family. But there's none of that. None of that, like, oh my gosh, this is going to be a very special time or something like that. It's just another moment in Nick's life. And some people think that that's sad, but that's just the reality of what life is. And if you hold those days in high regard, such as the holidays and the Christmas, the other days seem less so or meaningless, which is not good. And that's not the reality of your life. Again, I like Jordan Peterson, not as much so lately, but there is one thing that I really liked where he said, many people have seen this probably, having margaritas on the beach is not your everyday, at least not for most. He goes, your everyday is how you come home 20 years straight and ask your wife how her day was. That's more of a good perception, an ideal day for most people who are just, the average human. Most people are average. There's nothing wrong with that. They're just average humans. Most people don't have extravagant lives. Most humans don't have the bottom of the world lives. I mean, there are a lot of people, but most people are average. So that is an important thing to highlight. And the reason, like what I did with Ultra in Miami, I would go to Miami, I'd build it up in my mind. I get very excited about it because I love it, but I'm aware that going to a music festival and partying for 3 days is a piece of my life. And like anything, I hear people say, wouldn't it be great to do that every weekend? No, it wouldn't. Because in 2014, I went to 4 3-day and 1 2-day music festival in 1 year, and it got boring. And it was tough. I just didn't want to do it anymore. I messes your schedule up for a few days. If you're staying up late, went to EDC Vegas, you're staying up until 7, 8 o'clock in the morning for 3 days straight because it goes till 5:30 in the morning. So it's not what people think. It's the same thing with money. I hear people say this to me on calls all the time. If I just had $1 million, if I just had a Range Rover, stuff like that. If I just had a better Christmas, my life would be so much better. If I just enjoyed my wedding day, everything would be perfect. But that's not true, and you don't know that. That's not how it works. So when you have a holiday coming up, especially if you're watching this, if you're stuck, the best thing to try and do is enjoy it as much as you can. Welcome in any single suffering that comes along your way. So whether that's chronic anxiety, whether that's shame and guilt, whatever it is, try your best to allow that to be present, not need to run from it, which is very, very important. Because we'll just use Christmas for an example, because obviously that's the holiday coming up. If you celebrate it, Christmas is looked at as a special day, as a very, very special day. Then with a religious context, which I'm obviously not a religious individual, but I could see how people attach that to their mind. So the concept of the connection to the religion and God in their mind gives it an extra boost of feeling, of a good feeling, which is coming because of their beliefs in whatever they believe in, right? So if you have a deep connection with Christianity and you celebrate Christmas, the chances of that connection in your mind being greater is because of your extra belief with God. This is just an example of what's more than likely happening in the presentation of the brain, etc. And how do we know this? Because if we have someone who doesn't believe in God, like myself, which there could be a God, I just don't believe myself, versus someone who has a belief in God, and then they celebrate Christmas, the person who believes in God might have a stronger emotional connection in their mind, but not always. It's not always a one-to-one ratio like that. That's just an example of what could happen and how it presents in the mind. So no days in my life are viewed as better or worse. I try to do that. And it's the same thing with your day-to-day stuff either. So if I had a really long day, I try my best not to label that as a bad day or anything like that. I just label it as it was a day that had more things to do, which creates a more tired sensation in my mind, which means there was more problem solving that had to be done on my end, whether it was with my business, whether it was with Rob at OCD Recovery, all the coaching that we do, having to make the content, etc., having to think about my must-dos versus my like-dos. And that's another thing about the holidays I want to talk about. You know, these are just things to think about. A lot of people think with the holidays, they're like, I don't want to do anything. Zero things. I've made this mistake before. Not always the best option. I'm not saying you have to work around the holidays, but I'm saying that when you have this perception in your mind of disconnecting from society, which is why I always use that great quote by Cicero, the man who retreats to his villa by the sea to escape his mind forgets that his mind comes with him. That is one of the best quotes I've ever heard in my life. And when I first read that about 4 or 5 months ago, I thought, this is incredible. And this is what's wrong with most people's belief systems. I got to get away. I got to do this. And people are so resistant to that being broken down. They're like, no, you don't understand. Like, I'm just burned out and this and that. And I just need that. It's like, well, you really don't. You like it. It creates a feeling of relaxation in the mind. But I've seen people flip on a dime. I've seen people in my life who are having a really bad day. Then this idea of Christmas came up, or a holiday or vacation, and they're planning it and they're booking the Airbnb and they're talking about it. It's almost like they forget that they were depressed or they were anxious or even in some cases suicidal, because that belief system about like, oh, yes, like I have this thing to look forward to. Nothing shifted in your life except for your belief system about that and the way it presents in your mind. And that's the moral of this video. So like, take me for an example. Again, last year was a great example. We flew out a couple days before Christmas. Our flights got really messed up. They got delayed about 30 hours. Thankfully, we got the message before we left. There's people on my flight that were already there for some reason, and they were screwed because their keys were in their bag. So they're in the airport for like 30 hours, but I still had to wait about 15 to 16 hours in the airport. Then they sold our tickets. They literally bumped us off the flight. Erica was having a meltdown. They bumped us off the flight. And then we had to get a whole new flight. It was a bunch of extra money. We got there like a day and a half later, which cut our vacation by a day and a half. And we had both been working like crazy for the entire year, barely took any time off for ourselves. And compared to how most want to live their life, that's a personal choice I make. That's just how I like to live my life. Sacrifices, pros and cons. But it was a tough situation. And I was thinking about how well I handled that situation compared to how I would have. And it was astronomically better because I didn't have any expectations on how that should go. I wasn't like, I paid, because the tickets were more expensive. It's Christmas, right? They were so expensive. And then my mom was like, there's no way they're that much. I'm like, they're that fucking much. I was like, with everything going on with inflation and prices, and gas prices were even higher last year, and it's jet fuel, it's crazy shit. So, and then it was all that would happen, and I handled it very, very well. And then we didn't end up getting to Florida until like 1:30 in the morning, and then the airport's like an hour away. We didn't get back to their home until almost 3 o'clock in the morning. And it was just another experience in my life. And that's it. So I hope you guys enjoy. Please let me know what you think. Look for the WhatsApp link down below, and then we'll go from there.